As we get started with the message this morning, I kind of want to start off with this story. So I was brushing my teeth a couple weeks ago. I've brushed them since then. But I was brushing my teeth a couple weeks ago, and I noticed my beard was getting a bit scraggly. One of the problems of having a beard, or one of the problems of having hair in general, is that it just continues to grow. It doesn't stop when you cut it, and that would be nice and convenient at times. And then all of a sudden it stops growing altogether and it stresses you out. But in any case, my beard has not stopped growing. And a couple weeks ago, I noticed, hey, it's getting a little bit scraggly. I'm in the middle of brushing my teeth, and I'm like, oh, I got to trim that up. And so I reach over, I grab my clippers, put the guard on, everything's ready to go, and I turn on the button, and all it does is click. Nothing. And I'm like, turn it off, turn it back on. Maybe it'll fix it, right? That's always what they tell you to do. And so I turn it off, turn it back on, click, nothing. So I unplug it, plug it in the bottom outlet instead of the top outlet. Off, on, click. I'm like, forget this. I'll move over to Kim's side of the counter. I'll move over to Kim's side. I plug it in there. Off, on, click. Nothing. No difference. I'm like, well, I got to go. Like, my day's already getting ready to get started. I don't have time to sit here and just mess with this, so I'm going to have to deal with it later. I just hoped that somehow in a couple days the clippers would have fixed themselves. I know it's a bit ridiculous, but that's really what I was thinking. I was like, well, maybe it'll just be better. Maybe there's something weird today. Maybe the electricity isn't on, although the lights are on in this room. Maybe like power's not working somehow. This will all work out on its own. And so I just left. Well, fast forward to last Sunday morning when I was getting ready to come to church. I'm like, I still haven't trimmed the beard. It's definitely more scraggly, definitely more bushy than I want it to be. And I'm like, all right, time to use these clippers. And I walk into the bathroom and I'm like, crap. I just pretended the whole week that this wasn't actually a problem, but now I'm face to face with like the issue, and I'm hoping that somehow, miraculously, this thing has just gotten better. And so I turn on the clippers and they don't come on, and that's really no surprise to any of you in here, because we all understand this. Like, hoping that something that's broken just magically fixes itself is foolish. So fast forward a couple more days. I still haven't taken care of the problem. My wife finally says something to me, babe, are you trying to grow wings with your beard? Like, what is happening? It is just getting bushier and bushier. You need to take care of it. And so Tuesday, I said, yeah, I would take care of it, but my clippers are broken. And she said, how long have your clippers been broken? And I said, for the past week and a half. And she's like, why haven't we just bought new clippers? Why haven't you replaced what's broken with something that actually works? And I'm like, well, I made some excuse, and I just said, well, I was hoping that it would get better. And she's like, hoping that something broken gets better is just never going to actually work out. And we all understand it, but before you guys all judge me, like half of you drove here this morning with a check engine light on that you're hoping goes off before you have an emissions test, right? I know that because one of my cars has that problem too. And I can hope that it goes away. And I can pray that it gets better. And I can pretend that it's not really there. I love that commercial where like the person takes like a piece of electrical tape and just puts it over the light so that they can't see that the light is on. It doesn't make the problem go away. It's just I want to pretend that the problem doesn't exist. Now here's the thing where I want to really relate this to this morning. I think a lot of us do that in life with our struggles. Not just like with our car or with a set of clippers, but like with our sin. Like with the issues that we have that we know aren't leading us to the best life possible. And we just take this approach of like, I just wish I didn't have that issue. I wish that my struggle didn't influence me the way that it does, but it continues to pop its head out, and it continues to make a difference, and it continues to show its ugly head, and I'm just going to keep trying to put it back in the box, because if I just pretend that I don't have an anger problem, then I probably don't. I'm just going to hope that my struggle with my addiction goes away. I don't want to go to rehab because then I got to admit it. Other people are going to know about it. People are going to be able to see it. I'll be exposed. So I'm just going to hope that somehow I get past it. And we try. And maybe because we come into church every now and then, maybe we try this. God, help it to go away. God, I pray that it would be different. God, help me not to struggle with this. Help me not to think about it. God, help like the thought of looking at porn and like thinking about things to not come into my head anymore. And then we lay down in bed and we do our best not to think about it. In fact, we work so hard not to think about it that it's all we think about. And we find ourselves struggling night after night after night. And I heard a story recently of a guy in our church who did just that with porn. And his philosophy over years of a struggle was to lay down and hope that he didn't look at his phone, and he would lay and grip the sheets. He would try and do anything he could. He would take some NyQuil. He'd do anything to just not have to think about it. Literally played basketball at Supreme for hours until he was physically exhausted with the hope that he could come home and just pass out. And night after night, the struggle was real. And night after night, he'd give into it. And it just wasn't getting any better, no matter how much he hoped, no matter how much he wished, no matter how much he prayed. It wasn't seeming to change. And his experience in life, like many of us, our experience in life is letting us down from what we expected. And see, as I was studying this week for this message, I kind of came to this statement. This is really what we're leaning into. Our experience in life is determined by a series of many small decisions, most of which we make. Our experience in life is determined by a series of small decisions, many of which we make. There are some other decisions that other people make that will affect your life, sure. You don't get to control your boss, and your boss will make decisions, tiny or big, and they will affect how you have to do your job. I get it. Your spouse may or may not walk out. You may or may not have control over that. There are some things that get influenced by others, but many times our experience in life is a series of tiny decisions that we make. And we want it, if I'm real, I want it to be big decisions. I want the small decisions that I make over time to not really make that much of a difference. I want to be able to just make a few big decisions well, and everything just kind of work itself out. If I marry the right person, if I get the right job, if I go to the right school, then everything else will be fine. But talk to the recently graduated college student. Going to the right school hasn't made a difference in what job they've been able to get. And your job search is so freaking frustrating, and you're so tired of doing it, and you can play the game of I'm going to take my time and I'm going to do what I want, but in reality, you're just frustrated and let down that what you hoped would work out has not actually worked out. Or talk to the person who's divorced. And they'll tell you, I thought I married the right person. I worked so hard. I prayed so hard. I did everything that I could to make sure I found the right person, but the right person found their right person, and it wasn't me. And now I find myself in shambles, trying to figure it out and trying to move forward. But I made the right big decision, but it hasn't seemed to really change my experience. Or maybe it's the job. Right, there are some of you in here who at 18, you knew what you were going to do for the rest of your life. You were so excited about it, you were pumped, you were ready to go. You pursued that career, you got the job, and it's not turned out the way that you thought it would. And you find yourself day after day driving to a place where you're frustrated to be, feeling like most of life is just pointless, and the job that you do is pretty meaningless. And fast forward a few years, and now you find yourself at 50 just praying to God that somehow you can get fired, because if you had to keep working there, it would be worse than having no job. See, in those moments, we've made the right big decision, but our experience in life isn't determined by most of the big decisions we make. Our experience in life is determined by a series of small decisions that we make over time. And the mature people in the room, and I'm not including myself in this, because I still have broken clippers sitting in my house. I did go to Walmart yesterday because my wife told me it was time to go to Walmart and drove me there and made sure we had money in the bank account and paid for it. She's a mature person, not me. Right? Spend some time with me if you don't believe that. The mature people in the room understand that pretending something isn't broken or just hoping that something changes will never make it work again. There comes a time, if we want to be mature people, there comes a time where we have to own our growth. where we have to say, I'm going to be part of making the change. I'm going to make a practical change in my life to like impact my life in a different way. What I'm doing now is me trying my best, but it's just not working. The experience that I have is letting me down, and so I'm going to try something different. I'm going to make a shift. I'm going to make a series of tiny decisions that are different than the series of tiny decisions I've been making, with the hope that somehow it leads me to a different place in life. I'm convinced that Paul would agree with us. If you haven't been here for the past 3 weeks, it's okay. We're in the book of Ephesians. It's a book in the New Testament, so it's written after the life of Jesus, and we believe this is Paul's guide to practical faith. So most of the books that Paul wrote were letters, and this is one of those, but they were letters to very specific churches. So he writes the book of Galatians to the church at Galatia. It was the name of a city. And it's to address some issues that had been going on in that church, and he wants to help them. He does the same with the church at Corinth. He writes first letter to the Corinthians, and then a second letter to the Corinthians, because there were still some things they had to work on. He writes Colossians to the church at Colossae, and he writes Ephesians to the churches at Ephesus. Ephesus was a metropolitan hub, mainly of religion. They debated and discussed. They worshipped a god called Artemis. She was the god of fertility. They had statues to her. Paul began preaching there and actually got arrested and kicked out of the city because his preaching led to people not following Artemis anymore. And what like the blacksmiths in the town would do was make statues, and nobody cared about their statues anymore. Because Paul said, what you can make with human hands isn't a god at all. And so he began to like attack some of the things, and not just to be belligerent, but to attack it with truth. You're following something that's fake. You're making a decision time and time again to worship an idol that's a statue that some dude made in his basement. It's not going to help you. Instead, you need to make the decision to follow the one true God. And really what we understand about the book of Ephesians is that this is Paul's guide to practical faith. He writes it in 2 sections. The first part of the letter we've already done, and you can go back and listen to our podcast or check it out on the website or watch the video on YouTube. However you want to interact with it, it's available to you. But the first 3 weeks of this series, we looked at Paul's summary of the gospel. It's the idea of what God did for us as broken humanity. He wants to make sure that that's abundantly clear, that we don't miss the gospel story. And then the second half of the letter, which we're starting this morning, is going to explore how the gospel story should affect our personal story. Because the idea that like we could just come and we could just participate and we could just sing a couple songs and maybe drop a 20 in the bucket on our way out and like pat ourselves on the back and say that life is going to be completely different because we showed up this Sunday, I think the Apostle Paul would say is foolish. Not that he wouldn't be glad that you're here, not that I'm not glad that you're here, but that if all we do is come and listen for a half an hour and go back home and live life the same exact way, we're never going to experience something different. The example I use often is it's like a diet. I've gone on many diets in my life because since high school I've gained about 75 pounds. And I don't want to be heavier. I want to lose some weight. And I've read the book from Weight Watchers, or I've read the book on how to do it, but I've never really applied it. And so I can tell you all about how their point system works, but until I start applying it and eating less and exercising more, nothing's actually changing in life. The same is true with faith. We can come and we can sit and we can learn, but until we apply, there's not actually transformation that we experience. But Paul agrees with this idea of owning our growth. He writes it in Ephesians 4 this way. He says, with the Lord's authority, I say this, live no longer as the Gentiles do, for they are hopelessly confused. Their minds are full of darkness. They wander far from the life that God gives them because they have closed their minds and they've hardened their hearts against him. They have no sense of shame. They live for lustful pleasure and eagerly practice every kind of impurity. In any case, what he's saying here is that they're just wandering around. They're hoping against hope that somehow the Clippers fix themselves and everything just works out. They're aimless. And he says this, but that isn't what you learned about Christ. Since you have heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit of God renew your thoughts and your attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. And then he's just going to get real practical. In case you're confused, he says this: stop telling lies. If you're a liar, stop telling lies. Let us tell our neighbors the truth, for we are all parts of the same body. And don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry, for anger gives the devil a foothold. If you're a thief, quit stealing. Instead, use your hands for good, hard work, and then give generously to others who are in need. Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say, this was my mom's favorite verse when I was in high school. I'm not sure why, but she quoted it a lot at me. Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. And don't bring sorrow to God's Holy Spirit by the way that you live. Remember, he's identified you as his own, guaranteeing that you'll be saved on the day of redemption. Then he keeps going. He's like, if none of that has caught you, if you can't identify with lying or stealing or like using language in a way that you shouldn't, if none of that connects with you, don't miss this. Get rid of all bitterness, all rage, all anger, harsh words, slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. This right here is Paul's catch-all. If lying and stealing and anger and like harsh words are not your issue, maybe bitterness is, maybe rage is, but if those things aren't, all types of evil behavior, we need to get rid of it. And then he says this: instead, be kind. Be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God, through Christ, has forgiven you. So here's what I want to do this morning. In the next 15 minutes, I want to give you 4 steps to practical change. Because I'm convinced that you walked in here this morning not just hoping to hear a good message and look at a great-looking pastor and laugh at some of his really bad jokes. Right? Like, I don't think that was just like your wish. I think you showed up this morning hoping for a little bit more. Hoping for the potential to be a better parent this week. Hoping for the potential to be a better spouse this week. Hoping for the potential to be a better single person this week. I think that we understand that we're not doing life perfectly. I hope I didn't just burst your bubble. But life, the way we live it, is not perfect. And I'm convinced, because in many times it's the reason I show up week in and week out, that I want to experience a better life than the one I currently live. I'm desperate for that. Because I get angry and fly off the handle. I get stressed and run from my problems. I'd rather have a drink sometimes than pray sometimes. I'd rather go out on the boat than deal with the stress at home. I'm not saying that's what you do. I'm just saying that I think if we're real and if we're open and if we're honest, many of us aren't satisfied and most of us don't know what to do about it. But what Paul gave us, and the reason we're doing this series through the book of Ephesians, is it's a guide for practical faith. It's something that can actually impact our day-to-day. And so I want to give you 4 steps to practical change. The first one is this: become aware of your brokenness. Become aware of your brokenness. Somebody sometime probably told you that you were perfect and they lied to you. If you don't believe me, ask the person sitting next to you. Ask your spouse. Ask your ex. Like, it's just reality. You're not perfect. I'm not either. There's nothing that qualifies me as a pastor to be perfect. No, that's impossible. I'm not. We have to be aware of our brokenness. And here's why. Because if you're unaware, you can't change it. You will never change what you're unaware of. I think the 2 things that get in our way all the time in relationships, whether it be in church or at home or anywhere else, the thing that gets us in trouble more than anything is unawareness and unwillingness. We don't know what's going on. It's like having bad breath. Everybody else in the room knows but us. Right? Like, we've all been there. Like, that guy with coffee breath walks around and like we all kind of avoid him and he's not really sure what's going on, but we all know. But he's unaware. He can't take a mint or a piece of gum because he doesn't even know that he has an issue. You'll never change something you're unaware of. The second thing is that we find out what we need to change. We become aware, and we're just unwilling. Now, let me express my frustration of being a pastor. I love my job. I love the freedom that it gives me. I love what I do. There's a lot of things that I love about being a pastor, but one of the most frustrating things is that I don't get to make the decisions for you. I can listen. I can hear. I can help. I can help make you aware. I can't make you willing. There's some part of this morning where you're going to have to put on your big boy or your big girl pants and make a decision. I want to make a change because I'm tired of life living it the way that I am. I want something different. I'm willing to make a change. I'm willing to make a series of small decisions that are going to lead me to a different life. I can't address that one. You've got to address that one. But if we're not aware of our brokenness, we can never change our stuff. And so I want to challenge you this morning to become aware. We see it in verse 17 with Paul. He says, with the Lord's authority, I say this, live no longer as the Gentiles do. They are hopelessly confused. There are some of us this morning, me included, that walked in hopelessly confused about some of the issues that we have, having no idea about even some of the baggage that we carry. He says their minds are full of darkness. They wander far from the life that God gives because they have closed their minds and hardened their hearts against Him. They've got no sense of shame. They live for lustful pleasure. Why not, to be honest? If life is only temporary and we're not really sure of what's true and what's not, why not just live for lustful pleasure? I mean, the reason I don't is because I believe what Scripture says. I believe it leads to a better life when I follow Christ. But if you're not convinced of that, then why would we pursue anything besides pleasure? And they eagerly practice every kind of impurity. See, one of the things that I go back to often, and I do this with people when I get to sit down with them one-on-one a lot, we talk about what they perceive and how they perceive, what they process and how they process, and then ultimately we all present. So this is true for all of us this morning. This isn't really a point to argue, but this is just true for all of us. Whether you're a Christian or not, you can buy into what I'm about to say. At all times, we're all perceiving. We've got 5 senses. We all use them on a regular basis. We taste, we touch, we smell, we hear, we see. And you're perceiving from the way that I'm dressed, from what you're hearing out of my voice, even the tone of my voice. The chair, whether it's comfortable or not, the temperature, whether it's good or not. You're constantly perceiving. All the time, we all perceive. But here's what we learned in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, that when man sinned, when Adam and Eve messed up and sinned, their perception became broken. I know this is crazy, but it means that at times we'll see things that aren't actually there. We'll hear things that we thought we heard and we're convinced that we heard, but didn't actually get said. Think about this, ladies. When you go get your nails done, is everybody in that place talking about you? Or are you just convinced of that? My favorite thing is, I used to listen to my mom do this. She'd come home and be like, they were all talking about us and laughing at us the entire time. And I'm like, what language were they speaking? Korean. How do you know then? Were they pointing? Were they making hand motion about oh, so big? What was happening that you were absolutely so convinced that all they were talking about was you? Well, no, that's just the way I perceived it. And it's said with almost a bit of arrogance and overconfidence, obviously I couldn't perceive it wrong. But see, the way that God had designed Adam and Eve, when they messed up, when they sinned, they saw themselves differently. Their perception changed. And so even if we perceive it right, then we've got to process it. And there's different people in the room in this. And so we'll process through our heads. Some of us will think and think and think and overthink and overthink and overthink. We'll have 95% of our conversations all internally. They never come out. Because we just overthink and overthink and overthink everything. Some of us will process with our hearts. We're emotional. We wear our hearts on our sleeves. We want to desperately care for people. We want to relate to one another. And we just we want to connect. And then there's a third group of people that are processed through their gut. And it's this instinct that they have. It's almost like a sixth sense. And they're like, I just know what's right. And they go with it. Kim is one of those people. It drives me crazy because most of the time she is right. And I'm like, but you didn't think about it enough. And she's like, yeah, but I just know the right thing. And I spend 3 weeks thinking about it and I come to the same conclusion. And so we're learning how to move through that. But the way that we process can be messed up too. So we can have broken perception. We can see things or hear things or experience things that didn't actually happen the way that we perceive them to happen. And then we can process how all of that goes on in an incorrect way. And then ultimately we present based on either what we want other people to think about us or who we want to be or whatever it might come down to. All of that stuff could get broken. But if we're unaware of it, if we're unaware that at times we'll hear things that didn't actually get said because we come with some baggage that other people don't know about, it can get us into a world of trouble when we relate. We've got to become aware of our brokenness. The second thing is we've got to address our sin. In the moments where we're sinning, in the moments where we're struggling, in the moments where we're not following what God said was best, that has to be addressed. Paul said it this way, that isn't what you learned about Christ. Since you have heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and your attitudes. Put on your new nature. I know it's kind of weird. What is he talking about with nature? But it's the idea of that's who you used to be and here's who you are now. You used to chase every lustful pleasure. You don't need to anymore. You were created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. My biggest encouragement to you on this one is just call it what it is. We live in a politically correct culture that most of the time just pisses me off. And I think what we've done in society, and I'll be real, I do this too. I'm scared to say certain things from this stage. I'm scared to say certain things to people in conversation. It's almost like you have to say it and you go I know this isn't politically correct, but I was thinking about this idea and I may consider that this could be true and I know it's not the norm. And we have to give ourselves all of these outs around the things that we actually believe because if that person gets offended, it could really go wrong quick. And we're scared to insult. We're scared to say that somebody could be wrong. We're scared to disagree at times. And we just kind of live in this nebulous gray that we know ultimately doesn't fulfill anyone. It doesn't lead us to anything. It never calls us to get better. We desperately want something more, but it seems like nobody has the boldness to help us actually get there. And I think we've got to start being people who call it what it is. When we do life our way instead of God's, that's called sin. Have sex before marriage, sin. Just continue to go into debt instead of learning to save or to be generous, sin. Eat way too much instead of exercise, sin. Does that mean all fat people are sinners? Well, all fat people are sinners, but everybody's a sinner. It's not a statement about weight. It's a statement about self-control. I struggle with gluttony. I kill a line of Oreos. You guys laugh about that every time I talk about it. But I'll tell you, in the family-sized pack of Oreos, there's 14 in a line. There's 42 in the whole pack. Don't care how many calories, but I can eat 14 at a time, and I can continue going beyond that, but I stop because I feel like I would be gaining too much weight. Somebody recently thought it would be great to get me a pack of peanut butter fudge Oreos. I don't know what was going through their mind. They were heavenly. But they didn't come in a pack with 14 in a line. They came in a pack with 8 or 9 in a line, which meant that I went through almost all 3 lines before I cut myself off. You know why? Because at times I lack self-control. And at times I'd rather deal with my struggle and my stress. And instead of taking it to Jesus, or instead of doing something different, or instead of fighting back against what I'm fearing, I just run to food. You know what the Bible says about that? It's sin. It separates me from God. It's not living my best life, and it's not going to lead me to my best life. What it leads me to is gaining 70 pounds since high school. If we don't call it what it is, we're never going to have a desire to change it. Well, that's okay. You were having a rough day. You had an excuse. No. Let's be people who say we're done making excuses. We're done trying to justify it. We're done trying to just explain it away. The only person who can justify me is the one and only Savior of the world. That's Jesus. He's the only one who can justify my sin. I can't. So it's time that I just call it what it is and beg for forgiveness and move forward in life. I think we've got to do that. We've got to become aware of our brokenness, and we've got to address our sin. The third thing is we've got to develop a plan for change. Develop a plan for change. The biggest thing that I'll say on this is develop something else to do. Paul sets this model. He says, stop telling lies. Instead, tell your neighbors the truth. And then he keeps going in verse 27. I'm letting them catch up to me. Oh, verse 28, sorry. If you're a thief, quit stealing. Look at this. If you're a thief, quit stealing. It's a problem. That's sin. Taking what doesn't belong to you is sin. Thou shalt not steal, right? We've heard that one before. And then he has this giant word in here which begins to change everything. Instead. Use your hands for good hard work, and then give generously to others in need. I think for so many of us, we've been hoping that our sin is going to go away. We've been hoping that our struggle is going to go away. We've been gripping the sheets, praying that somehow it's going to be different tonight than it's been every other night of this week. But we've never replaced it with something better. My favorite example of this is my uncle. My uncle struggles with food. It's kind of a thing that runs in our family. I think it's a thing that runs in society, but at times he struggled with food, and I remember a couple years ago, he said to me, I eat a whole apple pie on Saturday nights. And he's not talking about like a small apple pie. He's talking about like I go to Giant and I get the big apple pie and I sit down and I just begin eating. And he said, if I had a spouse that was there and she came over and she took the apple pie and she took the ice cream and she just put them back in the fridge and back in the freezer and said, it's time for you to be done, I'd be fine with that. But because it's just me, and because I'm just sitting there by myself, most times I just keep eating. And he talked about a struggle with weight, and he talked about some different things that he had going on. And you know what he decided to do? He said, I'm going to stop getting apple pie, and I'm going to start walking. Literally, he started going to the track. And he'd walk 3 or 4 laps around the track, and then he'd come home. And then the next time he'd walk 3 or 4 or 5 laps around the track, and then he'd come home. It got to the point where he was walking 5 miles a day, and in the summer, 5 miles twice a day. Maybe every now and then I'll have a piece of apple pie, but he doesn't really care about the pie anymore because he's in a healthier place where he's making better decisions. He feels healthier, and he is healthier. He took something that he struggled with. If you overeat, quit buying apple pie. Instead, take care of yourself physically and exercise. If you struggle with gluttony, stop. But don't just stop there, because you know the longer you sit in the house and the longer that apple pie is there, the more you're going to want to eat it. My mom literally will pour coffee on her pancakes when she's done. Not because she likes coffee-flavored pancakes, because she's trying to ruin her pancakes so she stops eating them. Because she knows it's a struggle. And you can laugh at that, and I laugh at that, and I make fun of her, and I'm like, why did you just ruin good food? But the reality is because she doesn't want to continue struggling with overeating. We need to develop a plan for change that involves replacing what we struggle with something much better. And for like the religious people in the room, let me just give you the disclaimer, all right? Because some of you are going, you just need to pray more and try harder and expect God to move. And isn't your uncle just taking one God of like food and replacing with another God of exercise? And I would say absolutely not. That's foolish to even begin to argue. God calls us to take care of our body, and when somebody says, I'm going to stop overeating because that's gluttony and that's what the Bible calls sin, and instead I'm going to take care of myself and exercise, I believe that there's not only earthly rewards for that, he experiences a different life. He's in better shape with better health. He's like healthier than most people I know, and he's in his 70s. But I think there's heavenly reward for that too, because you've stopped separating yourself from God because of your lack of self-control, and you've begun to take control of what's going on in your life. And I'm convinced that God rewards that. And we can pray for strength, and we can pray for wisdom, because maybe we don't know what the plan is or what it should be. But I would challenge you to begin to think bigger and develop a plan that's actually going to lead you to a different life. The fourth thing is this. Become aware of your brokenness, address your sin, develop a plan for change, and lastly, live differently. All right, we said it at the beginning, I'll say it here at the end of the message. Our experience in life is simply a series of small decisions that we make over time. What we experience in life is a set of small decisions that we make over the time. And I'm convinced of this. When we decide to change our actions, our lives change with it. If you came in this morning frustrated, let down with part of the life that you experience, it's time to change. I can help make you aware. We have some tools here at Element. We have some different things that we'd love to equip you with and empower you with so you can begin to own your growth. We'd love to put you with a mentor that can help you walk through what it means to follow Jesus, how to read your Bible, all of those things. We want to help you with that. We can help make you more aware, but I can't make you willing. So the question you have to answer this morning is this: am I willing to experience a better life? Am I willing to make the changes that are necessary? Maybe for some of you, the change you need to make this morning is accepting Jesus. Like, you've come to church, you've been around it, you've heard the messages, you heard a message of truth and grace, but you've never really made it real for you. And it's time you take like a step of faith, and I'm going to check the box on the back of my connection card and say, listen, I want to have a conversation about what it means to accept Christ and get baptized, because I want to go public with this thing. I want everybody here to know that my faith is real. And I've been living a life outside of that, but I want to change, and I want to live a life inside of what God says is best. If that's you, I'd encourage you, check the box, drop it in the popcorn bucket. Let's have a conversation this week, and let's begin to pursue what it means to experience a better life. Because Jesus, when talking with a group of people, I quote this verse often here, but Jesus, when talking with a group of people, said, I came that you would experience life and life to the full. And I'm convinced, as your pastor, that anything short of that is not what he's called us to. It's time to make a change. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for who you are. God, I thank you that you are a God who died on a cross so that we could even experience a better life. Because on my own, what I deserve is nothing. On my own, what I deserve is separation from you. I'm not entitled to any of it. But God, you created me worthy of your grace. And you died for me even though I didn't deserve it. And so, God, I pray that this morning you'd help us to embrace that truth. God, help us to stop living a life that is lacking and begin to pursue the life that you're calling us to, life to the full. It's in your name I pray. Amen. So we're going to close with communion and one final song. Coming down your row is a stack of 2 cups. One of them has a cracker. One of them has some juice. You feel the freedom to take it. You also feel the freedom to just pass it to the next person. But communion is a reminder that Jesus gave us, that he steps into our mess and provides a way for us to be redeemed. And so if you want to be reminded of that this morning, that a better life is actually possible for you, then you take communion simply as a reminder of that. And the band's going to lead us in one final song.